The text from my father arrived on Tuesday. "You're no longer family. Don't contact us again." Then came the 8th word, just to seal it. "We mean it." I didn't argue. Hours later, I finally replied. "Makes sense. Just one small thing you missed." Then I logged into the tax account and unlinked all auto filings. 2 days later, I got a voicemail. The Internal Revenue Service had frozen the refund. I read those 8 words twice, then set my phone face down on my desk and stared at the wall for what felt like an hour. It wasn't a fight that had triggered this digital exile, no dramatic phone call or holiday blowout. Just a slow accumulation of tension that had finally reached its breaking point after years of passive aggression, control, and the kind of subtle manipulation that families perfect over decades. I didn't argue. I didn't fire back with my own angry message. I just sat there, absorbing the weight of being officially erased from the only family I'd ever known. But before I explain what happened next, let me back up and tell you about the 8 years that led to those 8 words. I'm 32 years old, and for nearly a quarter of my adult life, I've handled every aspect of my parents' taxes. Every filing season, every quarterly estimate, every deduction and credit they were entitled to. I set up their digital accounts, dealt with IRS correspondence when they inevitably forgot something, and even rescued them from a $3,000 penalty in 2019 when they missed a crucial deadline. I never asked for payment. Never once mentioned how much time it consumed or how complex their finances had become over the years. They never thanked me either, not once in 8 years, but I told myself that family doesn't keep score. The unraveling began last year when my sister Emily got divorced and moved back into our childhood home. Emily had always been the golden child, the one whose mistakes were just figuring things out, while I was the reliable one who worked, paid my own bills, and kept my mouth shut. She'd burned through her savings in a custody battle she never had a chance of winning, and once she landed back in the safety of Mom and Dad's house, it was like the family had collectively decided I was the enemy for not being more supportive. I'd already loaned Emily money twice, once for rent, once for legal fees. I never saw a dime back from either loan. Then she asked me to co-sign a $20,000 loan for an online boutique she planned to launch, selling thrift store finds with fancy logos attached. When I told her no, explaining that I wasn't comfortable being financially responsible for her again given her track record, everything changed. That was the trigger. I got the cold shoulder from Mom. My calls went unanswered. Then came that text from Dad, 8 words that severed 3 decades of family connection just like that. I was out. I didn't reply immediately. I let it sink in, thinking about every time I dropped everything to help them. Every late night spent sorting through boxes of receipts, every weekend drive 2 hours each way just to help them scan documents they could have handled themselves. I thought about the fact that I'd been the only one managing their taxes for almost a decade, and they had absolutely no idea how any of it actually worked. So when I finally replied, I didn't argue or plead. I just wrote. Makes sense. Just one small thing you missed. Then I logged into the IRS portal and began systematically dismantling 8 years of financial infrastructure. First, I revoked every single link between their accounts and mine. The automated filing system I'd set up, gone. I changed all the login credentials and switched the 2-factor authentication back to my phone. I deleted their old tax files from the shared cloud folder, cleared out saved documents from my hard drive, and remotely logged them out of everything. It took less than 30 minutes to undo 8 years of careful organization. I didn't have to do anything malicious or vindictive. I just stopped doing everything I'd been doing for free. 2 days later, I received a voicemail. My father's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. The Internal Revenue Service froze our refund. They flagged our return. We can't access anything, Jack. What's going on? Call me back. Please. I didn't call back. They tried to file their taxes themselves, or maybe they'd hired someone cheap who didn't understand the complexity of their situation. Either way, they'd submitted incorrect numbers, mismatched their business EIN, and filed late. That combination automatically triggered a fraud flag, and the substantial refund they'd been counting on was now frozen pending investigation. I sat in my apartment listening to that voicemail while eating leftover pizza. No rage, no satisfaction, just the strange quiet that comes when something heavy finally lifts. In that moment, I realized they'd never seen me as an equal, or even as a competent adult. I was just the guy who solved their problems until I became inconvenient. I blocked them that night, My parents, Emily, and my aunt too after she posted some passive-aggressive nonsense on Facebook about sons who forget who raised them. What none of them realized was that cutting off tax help was just the beginning. My father's side business had been using my QuickBooks subscription. My mother's Etsy shop had its domain hosted under my GoDaddy account. I canceled both subscriptions, not out of spite, but because I wasn't going to subsidize people who told me I was no longer family. But they weren't done with me yet. Over the next few weeks, I discovered what happens when entitled people suddenly lose access to the person who'd been quietly keeping their lives functional behind the scenes. And it got much messier from there. 3 weeks after I blocked all of them, the emails started arriving. Not from my parents directly, those were still blocked, but from unfamiliar addresses clearly set up for the sole purpose of reaching me. One was from Emily using an account I didn't recognize, subject line simply, "Please." I didn't open it. Another came from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, then a message from Linda, my parents' neighbor, who'd somehow gotten dragged into their drama. "Hey Jack, not sure what happened but your dad seems really upset. Maybe give him a call." They were circling like vultures, but not to apologize. They just wanted to pull me back in so I could fix their mounting problems. Then a certified letter appeared in my mailbox. My name written in my father's rigid handwriting, the kind of penmanship that suggested barely controlled anger. Inside was a 3-paragraph rant about how I'd sabotaged their finances. How family doesn't treat each other this way. And how disappointed they were in the man I'd become. No mention of the text message that had started this whole mess. No ownership of their role in the situation. Just blame, pure and simple. They didn't understand the fundamental truth. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had simply stopped helping. Meanwhile, their situation was snowballing beyond just the IRS freeze. The accountant they'd hired in a panic refused to proceed without clean books. But the bookkeeping software was registered under my name, and they had no access. Their Etsy shop tanked because my mother couldn't renew the domain. She tried to convince GoDaddy to give her access, but my email was still listed as the administrator, and they didn't even know what login credentials she'd been using. Emily predictably showed up at my workplace. She waited outside the building and ambushed me during my lunch break. No greeting, no small talk, just jumped straight into attack mode. "Are you really going to destroy our family over taxes?" I didn't respond. I simply walked past her and back into the building. That evening, she posted a lengthy rant on Facebook about toxic siblings and money-hungry people who think they're better than everyone else. I didn't read the whole thing, but I saw enough to know it was about me. They wanted me to feel guilty, but I felt nothing except tired. A few days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, and when I finally listened, it was my mother. Her voice was quieter than usual, less combative. She said they were sorry things had gotten so tense, that they wanted to talk, that they'd handled it badly. She asked me to come by the house to discuss things in person, said they miss me. I sat with that voicemail for 3 days, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Finally, I decided to drive out there. When they opened the door, it was like they didn't know what to say. I hadn't been home in nearly a year. The place looked identical, same porch furniture, same chipping paint on the garage, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum of a life I'd once lived. I didn't yell. I didn't make accusations. I just told them the truth as simply as I could. I wasn't angry anymore, just finished. I'd spent years doing everything quietly, without recognition or appreciation, and when I'd finally said no to one thing, they'd cut me out completely. I was tired of being the backup plan for people who didn't respect my boundaries or my time. I told them I didn't hate them, but I also didn't want to be involved in their lives anymore. I wasn't coming back, not for holidays, not for emergencies. I wasn't going to fix things anymore. My father tried to interrupt, to offer some excuse or justification. I held up my hand to stop him, then reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was everything they would need: tax files, account recovery information, passwords, and contact details for a CPA I'd vetted and even prepaid for their first consultation. It was my final favor, the last bridge I'd build for people who'd burned down every other one. Then I left. Didn't hug them goodbye, didn't look back as I pulled out of their driveway. As I drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I wasn't calculating what they owed me or planning my next move. I simply didn't care, and that indifference felt like the most honest emotion I'd had about my family in decades. I was free. They still tried to contact me periodically. Email messages that slipped through my spam filters, birthday cards forwarded through my landlord, even a voicemail last Christmas that I deleted without listening to. I haven't replied to a single attempt at communication. I'm not angry, and I'm not bitter. I just finally understand that family isn't about shared blood, it's about mutual respect. And once that respect is gone, there's nothing left worth fixing. Months passed in blessed quiet. No texts demanding my attention, no calls interrupting my evenings. I moved to a new apartment, got a new phone number, and methodically updated everything from my credit reports to my food delivery accounts. The air felt lighter somehow. I started sleeping better, eating regular meals, even dating again. At first, I expected them to try harder, to escalate their efforts to pull me back into their orbit. But when they realized I was genuinely serious about the separation, the noise gradually faded. Maybe they were too busy putting out their own fires to focus on me anymore. Either way, it felt over. Or so I thought. In early December, nearly 8 months after I'd walked away, someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I saw my Uncle Rick, my father's brother. I hadn't seen him since my grandmother's funeral years earlier. He looked older now, more worn down by whatever life had thrown at him recently. He handed me a small envelope and said he was just a messenger, nothing more. He didn't stay long enough for questions or conversation. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from my father, shorter and less accusatory than his previous communications. No blame this time, no demands. Just a few sentences acknowledging that he understood why I'd cut them off, that he didn't expect anything from me, but hoped that maybe someday I'd be willing to talk to them again. At the bottom, almost like an afterthought. We're selling the house, moving into a condo. Emily's finally working. Just thought you should know. I held that note for a long time, studying my father's handwriting, looking for hidden meanings or manipulations. But it seemed genuine in its simplicity, almost defeated in tone. That's when I decided to do something I hadn't even considered until that moment. Take one more drive to the old house before it belonged to someone else. I didn't call ahead, didn't announce my intentions. I just got in my car and drove the familiar route to the neighborhood where I'd grown up. The house looked smaller than I remembered, somehow diminished. I stood on the porch for a few minutes, looking at the front door I'd walked through thousands of times as a child, teenager, and young adult. No one came out. I could have knocked, could have initiated some kind of final conversation, but I didn't. Instead, I left a small package in the mailbox. Inside was a letter of my own, just a few lines. I'm not angry, but I'm not coming back either. I hope your next chapter is better than this one. I'm building my own. Below that, I'd included a $500 gift card to a grocery store chain. No explanatory note, no conditions attached. Just a small gesture, one final act of decency. Not for them, really, but for me. I wanted to end this story with something better than bitterness. It was the last time I ever went near that house. The holidays came and went without any contact from them. No more calls, no more messages slipped under my door. It was like they'd finally understood that I meant what I said. Or maybe they'd simply realized that I was beyond their reach now, that no amount of guilt or manipulation would bring me back. I still get the occasional Facebook message from distant relatives, cousins asking if I'll attend a family reunion, old family friends sharing nostalgic photos from Christmases past, trying to stir up emotions that no longer exist. I ignore them all. I've built something new now. Friends who feel more like family than my actual relatives ever did. People who don't keep score, who respect boundaries, who understand that love without respect is just obligation wearing a disguise. I learned something important through all of this. I'm done living my life out of obligation to people who don't value what I bring to their world. Sometimes I think about that original text message. You're no longer family. And I realize that now, finally, I agree with them completely. It was mid-April when I received the call. Not from my parents directly, but from the CPA I'd referred them to months earlier. Apparently, my father had insisted they keep my contact information on file, in case anything ever went wrong. They didn't have my new number, but the accountant did. I let it go to voicemail. The message was straightforward and professional. The IRS was conducting an audit of one of my father's returns from several years back, one from the period when I'd been managing their taxes. It wasn't my fault. After I'd left, Dad had gone back and made some adjustments, based on advice from a friend who claimed to know about tax loopholes. Those changes had triggered the audit. There was a pause in the voicemail, then the CPA added something that stuck with me. "They're trying to reach you. You might want to call him, Jack. He looks defeated." I didn't call. But that word, defeated, lingered in my mind. Not broken, not angry, just done. The way I'd felt a year earlier when I'd first walked away. A week later, I found myself driving to the condo address the CPA had mentioned during the voicemail. I didn't tell anyone I was coming, didn't call ahead. I just showed up. The place was smaller than their old house, cleaner, quieter. My father answered the door, and didn't say anything for several long seconds, just stood there looking surprised. My mother appeared behind him, and she looked older than I remembered, more tired. Emily was nowhere to be seen. I stepped inside without being invited. No hugs, no apologies. I didn't expect them, and they didn't offer them. I was there for one specific purpose: to hand over something they couldn't bring themselves to ask for directly. I gave them a complete set of all the tax returns I'd handled, organized chronologically, along with detailed notes explaining every line item and calculation. I also provided a formal letter to the IRS clarifying exactly which years I had managed and which ones I hadn't touched since our falling out. It was clear, concise, factual documentation. Not a rescue operation, just clarity for their audit. We didn't talk much during my brief visit. My father thanked me quietly. My mother asked if I wanted coffee. I declined. I looked around their new place, neat, organized, less chaotic than the old house but somehow colder too. It didn't feel like a home, just a place where people happened to be living. Maybe that's what they needed now. Less mess, fewer complications. As I headed for the door, my father asked the question I'd been expecting. "Will we ever speak again?" I told him I didn't know, and I meant it. I wasn't closing the door permanently, but I wasn't opening it either. I walked out, got in my car, and drove straight to the coast. I parked near the edge of a bluff and watched the ocean for a while, letting the sound of waves wash over me. I didn't feel sad or angry, just quietly contemplative. It hit me then that the real ending to this story wasn't going to be some dramatic confrontation or tearful reconciliation. It was simply me standing on my own, for the first time in my adult life, with no guilt weighing me down and no sense of obligation dragging behind me. That was the true resolution. Not forgiveness, not revenge, just freedom. They haven't contacted me since that day, and I think they finally understand they won't hear from me again unless I choose to reach out. There's nothing left to fix between us, no crisis to resolve, no game left to play. Just a man who finally walked away and meant it. About 4 months after I dropped off those tax documents, I thought the story was finally, definitively over. No calls, no emails, no random messages from family satellites trying to pull me back into orbit. Life had settled into a comfortable routine. I had a new job with better pay, new friends who didn't know or care about my complicated past, and I'd even started dating someone steady, intelligent, and refreshingly normal. Then I got an email from a law office I didn't recognize. Subject line: Disposition of estate, your attention requested. At first, I assumed someone had died. But when I opened the message, it wasn't about death, it was about estate planning. Apparently, my parents had drawn up a will and included me in it. The lawyer was notifying me of my status in the draft document. They hadn't told me directly. They'd let their attorney handle the communication, which felt typical of how they'd always managed difficult conversations. The attached PDF showed my name listed for a clean 50-50 split with Emily. Assets, property, investments I didn't even know they possessed. There was even a note embedded in the digital file from my father, just one line. "In the end, we are still family." The message didn't make me angry. It made me tired, because I knew exactly what it was. Not a gesture of reconciliation or peace, it was control. Another invisible hook planted carefully in the future, just in case they ever needed leverage to pull me back. So I made a quiet appointment with their lawyer and drove across town to a sterile beige office filled with fake plants and a receptionist who insisted on calling me Mr. Marsh. I signed the necessary paperwork, formally relinquishing any claim to their estate. No inheritance, no complications, no strings attached to my freedom. But the story didn't end there. 3 weeks later, I received a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "It's about Emily." I ignored it, figuring it was bait designed to draw me back in. Then another message arrived, You need to know. Check your email. Curiosity finally won. I checked my inbox and found a message from someone using a throwaway email address. Attached was a police report that made my blood run cold. Emily had been arrested for credit card fraud. She'd used my parents' information to open multiple new accounts and had run up nearly $40,000 in debt across various retailers and financial institutions. But more concerning to me personally, she'd also used my name on at least one application. The attempt had been denied, but it had triggered a soft inquiry on my credit report that I hadn't noticed. She'd forged a W-2 using my old address and my former employer's information. I had proof now of identity theft, and if I had accepted that inheritance, I would have been legally entangled in the financial disaster she'd created. The same lawyer who'd contacted me about the will was now trying to untangle the mess Emily had dumped into their estate planning. Apparently, my parents hadn't known about her criminal activities until collection agencies started calling. The next day, my father called me from yet another new number. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to his message. Jack, I know you don't owe us anything, but Emily's going to destroy everything we have left. We don't know what to do. Please. For a few seconds, I actually considered calling him back, just to hear what desperation sounded like coming from the man who'd once told me I was no longer family. I didn't call. Instead, I took action to protect myself. I scheduled meetings with the credit bureaus, submitted documentation from the police report, and froze my credit. I flagged my name with Fraud Protection Services and contacted my landlord, employer, bank, and anyone else who might be targeted by Emily's schemes. Then I mailed an anonymous package to the law office handling their affairs. Inside were copies of the forged documents along with a typed note. You picked your favorite. Now deal with her. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. A month later, I heard through a distant cousin, one of the few family members I hadn't blocked, that Emily had fled town. She'd skipped bail and disappeared completely. The estate planning had been scrapped, my parents were selling off assets to cover debt and legal costs, and they'd moved out of the nice condo into a rental property on the outskirts of town. And me? I moved to Seattle, got an even better job, and continued building my quiet, peaceful life with the same girlfriend who'd stood by me through all the family drama. Sometimes I get messages from people trying to drag me back into the story. Invitations to family weddings, questions about whether I know where Emily went, updates about my parents having to sell their house. I don't answer any of them. I did exactly what they never expected. I left the mess entirely to them. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel guilty about walking away. That's the part they'll never understand. I was their safety net, their problem solver, the son who kept all the family's cracks hidden from public view. When I finally cut that rope, they all fell. And I didn't even look down to watch it happen. A full year passed after the Emily incident. No arrests that I heard about, no sightings, no dramatic confrontations. She'd simply evaporated, like smoke dissipating into air. Rumor had it she'd skipped states and was living under an assumed name. Someone claimed to have spotted her in Arizona, working under the table at a dive bar, but I didn't care enough to investigate. My parents never found her. By the time the IRS and various debt collectors had finished with them, they'd sold nearly everything of value. The condo, the boat my father had bought during one of his "I deserve this" phases, even some family heirlooms that I'd once thought might end up in my living room someday. Not anymore. But I wasn't watching their financial collapse for satisfaction or vindication. I'd stopped tracking their situation entirely. I was fully, completely out. Until my mother wrote me a letter. It was handwritten and sent to my new address in Seattle, an address I definitely hadn't given her. She must have gotten it through someone else, though I couldn't imagine who. The letter was written in shaky cursive, probably with the hope that handwriting would feel more sincere than a text or email. The message didn't beg for help or ask for anything specific. It simply said, "We understand now. We really do. You were never the problem. You were the glue, and when you left, we fell apart. I don't expect anything from you, but I wanted you to know, if you ever find it in your heart to visit us, just once, no strings attached, just to see us one last time." I kept that letter on my kitchen counter for weeks, reading it occasionally while drinking morning coffee. I didn't owe them anything, not a visit, not a conversation, certainly not forgiveness. But something about the phrase, "just once," kept nagging at me. So I did something I never thought I'd do again. I flew back. I rented a car at the airport, and drove to their latest address, a low-income apartment complex next to a closed-down dry cleaner. No porch swing, no garden, no traces of the suburban comfort they'd once taken for granted. When they opened the door, they looked smaller somehow. Not physically diminished, just less certain of themselves, less entitled to space in the world. I walked inside. My mother offered tea. I accepted. My father asked if I was doing okay in Seattle. I nodded. We sat around a kitchen table that had a cracked edge and one leg that wobbled slightly. There were no grand speeches, no emotional confrontations, no attempts to guilt me into resuming contact. Just silence punctuated by small talk about my job, about the weather, about how different the Pacific Northwest was from what I'd grown up with. They didn't ask about Emily. I think they'd finally learned not to bring up subjects that would only cause pain. After maybe an hour, I stood up to leave. My mother followed me to the door, looking like she wanted to say something important but couldn't find the words. My father hung back, just watching. Then I did something that surprised all three of us. I handed her a small envelope. Inside was a prepaid grocery card and a printout of information about affordable legal clinics in the area that could help them navigate the remainder of their financial troubles. No lecture, no conditions, no emotional manipulation. Just practical help. She looked at me with confusion, like she couldn't tell whether this was an olive branch or a final goodbye. It was both. I told them this would be the last time we'd see each other. I wasn't doing this out of obligation or lingering guilt, but because I wanted our story to end with something human, something better than the bitterness that had defined the previous 2 years. They nodded their understanding. I walked out, drove straight back to the airport, and flew home to Seattle. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I haven't spoken to them and haven't heard from them either. No letters, no attempts at contact through intermediaries, no social media messages from extended family members trying to broker peace. Sometimes people ask if I regret walking away from my family so completely. No. Not even for a second. Because what I left behind wasn't really family. It was a structure built on manipulation, financial dependency, and the kind of toxic silence that families mistake for harmony. The moment I stepped away from that structure, I finally understood what genuine freedom felt like. Letting go wasn't the hardest part of this whole experience. The hardest part was realizing that the people who'd raised me had never really known me at all. They'd known the version of me that solved their problems and asked for nothing in return. But the real me, my thoughts, my dreams, my boundaries, my sense of self-worth, had been invisible to them. Now I live a life where I'm seen clearly by people who matter, where my contributions are valued rather than expected, where saying no doesn't result in exile. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I found a letter slipped under my apartment door in Seattle. No return address, just my name written in handwriting I recognized but hadn't seen in years. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what emotional minefield I might be stepping into. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, with a brief message. Jack, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I need your help. Please meet me at the old cafe on 5th Street tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'll be there. No signature, but I knew the handwriting belonged to Emily. I hadn't heard from her in over a year, not since she'd vanished after skipping bail on the fraud charges. After everything that had happened, the identity theft, the forged documents, the financial destruction she'd left in her wake, I'd assumed she was gone for good. But curiosity got the better of me. The next day, I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. It was nearly empty except for a barista and an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner. The soft hum of the espresso machine was the only sound breaking the afternoon quiet. I took a seat by the window and waited. At exactly 3 p.m., Emily walked in. She looked different, older, more weathered by whatever life she'd been living under her assumed identity. She spotted me immediately and approached the table cautiously. Jack, she said, taking the seat across from me. I nodded, waiting for her to speak. After everything she'd put our family through, the burden of explanation was entirely on her. I'm not here to ask for money, she began, which immediately told me she probably was, in some roundabout way. I just wanted to tell you that I'm turning myself in. That caught me off guard. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. I've been living under a false identity, she continued, but I can't keep running. I'm exhausted, Jack. I've made a mess of everything, and I need to face the consequences. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or deception, but she seemed genuinely worn down by whatever existence she'd been maintaining. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. For the fraud, for using your name, for destroying Mom and Dad's finances. For all of it. I sat with that apology for a moment. Part of me felt vindicated, finally, acknowledgement of the damage she'd caused. Another part felt a surprising twinge of sadness for the person she might have been if she'd made different choices. I hope you find peace, I said finally. It was the most honest response I could offer. She gave a small, sad smile. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a few moments before she stood up. Goodbye, Jack. Goodbye, Emily. As she walked out of the cafe, I felt something I hadn't expected: closure. The final chapter of Emily's story was ending, not with more drama or manipulation, but with surrender. I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and stepped out into the Seattle afternoon. The sun was shining, the air was clean, and for the first time in years, I felt like all the loose ends of my old life had finally been tied up. I was ready to move forward with my life, unburdened by the weight of family obligations that had never been reciprocated, free from the drama that had defined my relationships for too long.